I'm Eric Barden.
I'm Amy Barden.
And this is another episode of Barden. Hopefully, most of you have seen part one with Brandi Kruse. We had just a fantastic discussion with her, and we're going to continue that now in part two. We're talking about journalism, politics, the extremism of both parties, sort of Washington politics over the last 40 years. And we touched a little bit on Seattle too. So it's all here. We're looking forward to part two.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Until more people say, I'm not playing that game anymore. Like, no, we're going to go back. We're going to have reasonable conversations, fact-based conversations. And if it means we have to shut out the far fringes, then so be it. You know, I used to be very like, kumbaya, let's get everyone into the conversation. My show was literally called, before I left Fox, The Divide, and we would have people who would sit across from each other on differing sides of issues,
which
and we'd try
loved,
to get them.
By the way.
But it would be like stabbing myself in the eye with a fork. It was so hard and painful to watch these people try to agree on anything, and that's just sort of where we've come as a society.
Yeah.
But so what I've realized is, we have to forget the extremes in the equation for a little while. I mean, there are people who don't want to debate. There are people who will never change their opinion.
Yeah.
And they're on the far left, mostly in Washington State. I would say 20% of the state is far, far left, socialism. I'm not budging an inch. And then you've got maybe 10% that are far, far right. Like, yes, let's throw homeless people in prison or let them die. But the rest of us are like, okay, we see these problems as clear as day.
Yeah.
We see that what we're doing is not working. So let's just have fact-based, reasonable conversations where we don't accuse the other person of like hating the homeless or wanting them to die. And then we can come to some
part of the
impetus
of putting this podcast together was, I mean, obviously Amy and I come from wildly different perspectives
Obviously,
on a lot of these
I'm
issues.
often right, and he's often
Well,
wrong.
Well, yeah.
Correct.
Because of the sheer count of the number of words used. Right?
Yeah, I do win word count.
You win by word count.
Yes.
I don't know. I feel like you're winning on word count
Well,
today.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm
You guys are
excited.
keeping
I'm
track.
excited you're here. I'm
should
going to
have
let
a
her
counter
talk
up.
in a minute. But part of the impetus...
I'll let you.
He will
allow
Let's make
you.
sure that's a real.
Now I'm
This is a real.
mansplaining. Right?
I didn't realize I was coming on a sexist show. Had I known.
I love it.
Call me
This
Dr.
is
Barden
good.
for the rest of
Dr.
it.
Barden
Yeah.
for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Part of it was, we sit around the dinner table and we'll have wildly different perspectives on topics. And yet when we talk through, we often get to the same place or very, very close.
Yeah.
And we also, I think, one of the reasons I like The Divide so much was because you were able to see differing perspectives and make your own decisions about, well, that kind of makes sense to me. Well, but I like what that person said about this and that and the other thing. And that's when we were talking earlier about journalism. I think that's what is currently missing. I watch varying different news sources because I don't think you can possibly get all your information from one source anymore by virtue of the bias that we've seen. But I have to believe that there's a whole swath of folks out there, like you're talking about, that 70% that aren't extraordinarily biased, that want a nuanced, intelligent discussion about topics that isn't, you're racist, you're a bigot, you're whatever the case may be.
I do think most Americans agree.
You
on
can
those
talk
things,
now.
You may speak. It's going to be a fun night for you after I leave.
I was going to say, we do have some whiskey.
If it gets crazy, we got whiskey.
Might be time. This might be the first podcast we break it out.
Yeah.
From 2015 to 2022, when I was coming back, I was in the Midwest. I was working in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. I was going to school in Tennessee. And I grew up in Southwest Washington. I mean, I grew up, I didn't really know my parents' political perspectives. They were really concerned about ethical leadership. And both had the belief that, if you've got an ethical person, it's like this other stuff is details, states' rights. I mean, I grew up with that kind of simplistic idea of the right versus the left. And when I was in the Midwest, it felt almost like going back to childhood because Ohio truly is purple, right? It was 50-50. When I was in Kentucky, Bashir was elected. So you have, 80, 85% Republican state who loves this Democrat governor, is very popular. And they were both, DeWine and Bashir both, I thought were actually quite effective during COVID. It was so much less politicized there.
Right.
And so I'm still catching up, trying to understand like what the hell happened here. Because again, I come into government, there's pending lawsuits and all this stuff. And it was kind of shocking. But I felt more intelligent in the Midwest because I never assumed that I was in any kind of echo chamber.
Sure.
And I was in this, kind of child welfare, mental health space where it's messy and it's subjective and it's complex and people are different. But I did strengthen my ability to anchor into the moral imperative. Do you think the person's life has value? And I wish folks in my space, again, in homeless response, like, let's start there. And if you know anything about the brain and anything about behavior, even through your own life or through parenting, you know that people can and do change. And I just don't think we should be promoting anything that wouldn't predictably support that change.
Can I ask you about that?
Please.
You say people can and will change.
Yeah.
From your experience working in other places of the country, when they were doing something that wasn't working, were they willing to shift? Did you see more of a willingness to go in a different direction?
I think I was always a unique leader because I was in the nonprofit sector. And I, became, I think, well liked in some circles because I would give grant money back. Or I would say, we thought this was going to work. We had this intervention, but it doesn't appear to. Yeah. We should try something else. And I got, on the side, I did stay in these different academic programs. I got really into the improvement science, right? Which is just this rapid iteration. It's kind of militaristic. When you've got half the information you need, you go to act. And that's why I was quick to get the pilot off, because I was like, well, I've got a good framework here. I've got a good theory. And now we're going to go test it and see, is it working here? And half of my assumptions are probably going to be wrong. And I think the nonprofit sector isn't designed to be honest because it is sort of a grants Hunger Game environment. You're trying to, again, back to research. Most research never sees the light of day. It's always about money. And who is the funder? What does the grant maker expect you to do? And when I was a grant maker, I was always trying to just create safety. Like, just tell me if it's working or not. I'm not going to take your money back. But if we need to repurpose it, I think that's what Mackenzie Scott is trying to demonstrate, right? It's like $25 million block grant. I believe in your leadership. I see evidence that this is working. Go. No strings attached. And so until we can shine light on ethical leaders who will do that. And that's what I'm trying to appeal to the public to say, anyone who says there's a single problem, a single solution, don't trust them.
Right.
That person does not understand the issue.
Well, and I would just like to see an admission ever that they were wrong.
That they were wrong.
It's one of my big complaints about COVID, and it's just one of many examples, is had Governor Inslee come out and said, look, even at the beginning, because it was such a crazy situation, hey, we've never been through this before. We're going to make the decisions that we're going to make in the moment. We hope we're right. We're guessing. And you know what? If we're wrong, we're going to come tell you. But no, he was saying literally, I am the only one in the state of Washington with the power to save lives. I mean, he was saying the craziest stuff. And even, the vaccines. And look, I got the vaccine. I was like, oh, you're telling me. And at that time, I hadn't been tainted by, the inability to tell me you were wrong. And so when it became clear that it just wasn't what it was promised, not that it had no usefulness, but it just wasn't what it was promised, this inability to come out and say, hey, the vaccine mandates don't really make sense anymore. So we're going to go in a different direction. And you see that with homelessness. I mean, when you look at the chart of like money spent for outcomes, same with education in our state. We're spending more money than ever before for worse outcomes than ever before, lower testing scores, less enrollment, and fewer kids actually coming to class. And we're spending just astronomical amounts of money. And then they come out and they say, well, if we only had more money, we could do better. Well, wait a second. For 10 years, we've given you more money every single year, and you've done worse every single year. The same with the homeless crisis. They always come back to, they judge success here based on the dollar figure, based on the amount of money that they can dedicate to a particular program. And that's clearly the only barometer that they're using, because they can't possibly be using the number of homeless people coming off the streets as a barometer for success. I'll give you an example. And this is stuff that frustrates me, that a lot of Democratic and progressive voters haven't woken up to this yet. There's one party that's been in power in Washington state for 40 years. They've had the governor's office for 40 years. They've had a complete trifecta in Olympia for most of the last 24 years, with a few exceptions. And so you can't blame anyone else. And when you're a leader and when you choose to be a leader and run, the buck stops with you, right? At least it should. So I think it's frustrating to me that reasonable Democrats don't say like, hey, let's try something different and see if it's any different on the other side. One example, Governor Jay Inslee did a right-of-way initiative program. The highway was littered with homeless encampments between Seattle and Olympia. Couldn't avoid it, totally visible. So he decided, okay, we're gonna do this right-of-way initiative where the state is gonna go clean these Department of Transportation right-of-ways. Well, we did the math after the first year on it, and they were spending $1 million per person to get them out of one of those right-of-ways and out of homelessness in their assessment. And we put that figure out there, and Jay Inslee said, well, that's not fair. You know, we also had to have some capital costs for buildings that these people are going to go into. And we said, okay, we'll subtract the capital costs out of it. That's a fair, right? We'll subtract the capital costs. Still $500,000 per homeless person. And he was out there in the media lauding this as some like fantastic success. And it's like, not only is that an epic failure, but people who believe that we need to be helping the homeless and actually, you know, they claim to care. Like we're so empathetic, we're so progressive. It's like, well, why don't you care that we're spending $1 million per person to get them out of homelessness? Because that should be able to help at least 20 people get out of homelessness. So it's this odd thing to me that progressives who say this is about compassion and empathy aren't also on the side of, you know, fiscal hawks in demanding to know where every dollar is going and why we're not seeing any movement. Because if you care about the homeless, right, then you too should care.
Yeah.
If they're spending billions of dollars and we have more homeless people today than we've ever had in the state before, it makes no sense.
Yeah. I was asking a friend about this recently in another city, and because I'm always trying to understand why. You know, now I just know a lot more now, and I know what works. And again, we're always talking to people in recovery, and all of these things go together. You know that. Generally, somebody is just as impacted, and there's trauma, and there's mental health issues. And everybody tells me the same thing, that it was basically a person who made the difference, right? So that can happen in a lot of different contexts, but somebody invested enough in me and started messaging my value and basically helped me to become the authority on my own patterns. What the hell is going on? It is a person and not a program. And I really think we're missing the point of that. It's Erica said it makes us feel better to feel like, oh, this is a financial thing, and if we just invested more. Because basically then you're shifting responsibility away from your own decision making. And we do have models that work all around the country. I talk about Weld all the time. I love Uplift Northwest. I love basically every model I see that works. It does have this path to self-reliance where people are starting to like themselves, right? And feel self-respect, maybe for the first time. And restorative practice. So, you know, I just am making up new words now.
I don't know. I heard you call them justice involved, and I almost couldn't get past that. But I'm going to bury that deep inside and
see,
move on.
I've become numb over time. I've heard it so
That's what we call a criminal. No, I'm kidding.
Justice involved. Yeah, no, it's funny. No, it's really interesting. Is I have been. I don't mind criticism at all. It really helps me. But folks who've been justice involved, they're like, Amy, I was an addict. You know, you just say that. You know, I was just stop your academic speak. Let me tell my story. This is how I describe myself. You know, like, do you know Dave DeRosier, who runs Other Side Academy in Salt Lake? You guys would be best friends. But the first time we spoke, so this is a prison alternative. Again, the most successful model we know. 501c3, social enterprises. It's completely sustainable internally, right? They've got folks upskilling, and these are serious folks, right? Who are looking at long sentences. But the first time I talked to him, he was like, Amy, you're probably going to think I have some trauma background, and that's why I became a criminal. He's like, I didn't. He was like, I was an asshole. I was an asshole as a little kid. I was an asshole as a teenager. I was like, whoa.
Well, but that's sort of the key to their program. The Other Side Academy is wildly successful. And it's, again, heavy on accountability with a ton of support. So folks move in there. There's no locks on the doors. You can leave whenever you want. You don't, because then you know, it might engage the justice system. It might not. Some folks are walk-ins that want to do it, but a lot of folks are doing it as an alternative to spending time in jail or prison.
Becoming justice involved.
Yes, they're trying to not be justice involved.
They're
justice adjacent. You know,
that's a new academic term. That's going to be in research soon. But he just is wildly successful. But he holds himself accountable in the same way. Because he came through the system. He went through Delancey Street in Southern California and was there for 3.5 years, became a major, sort of peer involved leader of Delancey Street. Then he was taken out of there and set this up from scratch in Salt Lake City. I think they're now in Denver
Also
as well.
Denver, yeah.
Wildly successful program.
It's entirely peer-led.
And pays for itself.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are things that work. We stayed there.
That's the problem, though. What you just said is the problem with why it won't be adopted. It pays for itself.
Yeah.
It pays for itself, and tax money doesn't pay for it.
Yeah, and I asked him, I was like, how is this not the model? Because they're 10 years in.
Yeah.
And again, it's just like, unbelievable scorecard, especially when you consider the investment. And his response was, okay, say we solve fentanyl tomorrow. Like, it's gone. There's no more addiction in this country. He goes, what is the impact? And I didn't understand where he was going, but he was talking about all the different industries, that would lose money or people who would be put out of business.
All of the programs.
Providers and pharmaceuticals
the,
and corrections and...
Yeah, there's a ton of, you can see this web, right, of all this, like if I have a politician like sitting in front of me and they're like, we have the scourge of fentanyl or whatever it is, and Bob Ferguson bragged about, his work and getting these settlements with opioid manufacturers and all of this. And it's like, okay, when's the last time you said anything about needing to secure the southern border? The heroin crisis, the fentanyl crisis via China through Mexico has driven so many deaths on our streets. And if you had someone like that who was like, we need to get a hold of this fentanyl crisis, I know it's not popular for me as a Democrat to say, but that also does start at the southern border. The Trump administration has our full support in securing the southern border so that we can save lives on our streets today.
Right.
Also, ICE, we don't support everything we're doing, but maybe if we can work with the Trump administration, make some concessions, those drug dealers, ICE is working to get off the streets that are deportable. By all means, you have the full support of the state of Washington to take the drug offenders off the streets who are trafficking these narcotics. And you don't see that, right? Because there's always this political equation coming in.
Yeah, you have to decide. You have to side with your team. And that's the polarization part too. I mean, I've told this story on another podcast, but I think it's appropriate here. My dad was a politician, King County councilman, and was a Republican. And I would go as a kid. I would go down and run around chambers and in the office and the hallways and this and that. And I watched a lot of what was going on. And then my dad would debate and discuss issues in the council meetings and be opposed to this guy's perspective. And then afterwards, my dad and this guy would go across the street to the Golden Gavel, and we'd have to sit in the restaurant. They'd have a beer together and whatnot. So, and we frankly vacationed.
Golden Gavel.
The Golden Gavel. It's now some sort of public
empty storefront, like sorry, DSA. I'm sure they don't love when I say that.
It's an empty
They're
store.
working on it,
but. We vacationed with some of the Democratic council members at the time. And so it was, they were debating the substance of the issue. They weren't hating each other because they had a different perspective. And they worked together as well. I mean, like what you were just positing, I'm sure people are like, what could that possibly be? Well, I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. It absolutely could be. And it's a much, much better way to do things. And one of the things that's a problem right now is I just had a little snippet with one of my friends on Facebook who posted just some outrageous stuff. Yeah. And my comment was, I guess I'm going to have to pause you again. Some of his friends have liked my post because he's just like so extreme.
The vitriol.
Just the vitriol is just so ridiculous. Yeah. But I also think, because I'm a little bit mad at him too for not being more thoughtful and not to really think about what it is that he's saying. But I also recognize. And I'm asking this because you had said earlier you like the way that things are going. So I want to.
Yeah, I'm curious about.
I want to cover this ground before we get to that ground. I know that he's sitting home scrolling through his phone, through whatever app he's choosing to scroll through, and he's getting feed after feed after feed of exactly what he thinks reported back to him. The algorithm is got him down a rabbit hole that he has not remotely considered a different perspective or any other view, it's like, and the Seattle Times you mentioned earlier, I've been a subscriber to the Times for as long as I can remember. And I swear to God, every time I open my phone and I see a new, headline or something, they are so extreme now.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not, in the headline, there's no room for any debate or discussion about anything. The end of the world is here. And, it's Trump's fault. It's just like, it just seems to me that we are losing the ability to have an honest discussion and where it is nuanced and you get multiple perspectives. I remember seeing articles where, and it still happens occasionally, where, the reporter will say, well, this side says this and this side says this and some of the evidence is this. But it's just so rare anymore. And most people don't get their news. Most of my most energetic friends on Facebook don't get their news, or Instagram or wherever, don't get their news from any news outlet. They get their news from social media. So what do you think about the algorithm and the...
Yeah, the algorithm is tough, especially if you're not equipped to... And look, it does take an eye, right, to spot. And even you can add AI into that as well. AI is becoming increasingly dangerous. I've almost been fooled a few times by things. So the algorithm feeds you what it knows that you want to see. And so, my mother and I are polar opposites. And I look at my mom's posts and I just want to be like, Mother, you have to turn off MSNBC. That is so devoid of any reality. And she's just so angry at Donald Trump, which is fine. But, there's a lot of other things going on too. And so it goes both. It'll feed you stuff with the left, feed you stuff with the right. I don't know. And it's gotten worse, but it was brought about by an improvement. So Facebook and Google, which runs YouTube, really throttled specifically conservative content from 2020 to 2024. It's an admission that Mark Zuckerberg has made. I was one of the pages that got throttled. We got a literal email from Facebook. It wasn't just to me, Mark, Dear Brandi. It was to, generally the pages that had been suppressed by the algorithm, explaining why they did it, apologizing, and it was like the lights turned back on. And so now, because of the blowback and because of big tech working with the Biden administration, which they acknowledged that they did, and even, would get direct emails from the White House about certain content to suppress. So because of, I think, the embarrassment of that, and in the case of Mark Zuckerberg, I do believe he realizes the error of the ways. Now it's just fire hose, right? I think that's better in a country where we have free speech than to have big tech and the government deciding what speech to suppress, but it creates a very difficult environment for the average American news consumer to navigate.
Yeah. I don't think we're able to think critically anymore. I think that's a big part of it. I was asked once, who are your biggest thought partners or influences? And I was like, my kids. Yeah. But I swear to God, it's the truth. They're all in their 20s now, and growing up, it was me and them at the dinner table. Obviously, they have this different lens. Yeah. From a different generation, and they had a really interesting experience. The older two, they were a third of life in Portland, Oregon, and then Seattle, right? Central District, Seattle, and then they're in Union, Kentucky, right? For the other third. So I think it made them balanced thinkers. But I remember once, it was my older son, Isaac, I was saying something about racism. And he just, he's probably 14 at the time. He's like, I don't think the country hates Black people. I think we hate poor people. And I was like, what? And thinking this kid's wrong. And he made such an articulate case actually about that. He was like, we love LeBron, we love Oprah, we love Obama, we love, he's like, you've been to Appalachia. Yeah. You tell me. And it was brilliant. And so, but what's interesting is they all disagree on a whole bunch of things. And it's the collective is so much more intelligent, right? When you can contemplate a different perspective. And so, again, that's what we're trying to demonstrate all the time. That was a joke early on, was what do you two even talk about? I'm like, everything. Yeah. The most interesting person I could possibly talk to. His life experience is almost the opposite of mine. And we're always joking about walking down the street, what I see versus what he sees. And he feels like, I'm Pollyanna. I think he's a cynic. And then I also go, well, his perspective is completely anchored in his reality and what he's observed. And we both have, disproportionate exposure, me to like heroics and the best of humanity. And when people change, those are the folks who come into my space. And obviously, he's been dwelling in the opposite. And I feel like until we can just sit down and acknowledge that and have a conversation about it. And again, you said earlier, and you're exactly right, when it comes to human suffering, the crime and the crisis and the homelessness, we have got to depoliticize that conversation. Yeah. We have to.
Yeah. And unfortunately, to depoliticize it, you have to bring balance back to Washington politics, because the way it is right now, there really is no incentive for the Democratic Party, which is verging on socialism very quickly. It's almost hard to decipher between progressives and socialists in the state. They have so much consolidated power that they don't really have to listen to anyone. There is no wheeling and dealing that happens behind the scenes like your dad would do. I mean, they don't have to. So why would you? It's like grading your own homework every day. You're going to give yourself an A every single time, and there's no one else's opinion that matters. Whether I was in a deep red state or a deep blue state, I'd feel the same way about one party rule. It's incredibly destructive. It's why I am a diehard independent. And why, yes, I've supported Republican candidates, because it's a math issue. We need a certain amount of seats and a certain amount of positions to go to the other side just so they have to get in a room and come up with sane ideas, not rent control, not pay for striking workers, not reparations for people based on skin pigmentation and not history. It's really insane stuff. And so more so than anything, in order to force in a state like ours, force the conversation back in the right direction, we have to have some headway in chipping away at one party rule.
Right, because it's been one way for so long.
It really has, and it's just gotten worse. And you can see, the ideas coming out of Olympia in particular are utterly insane. But also social media has ruined the country. Social media is ruining the world. I mean, it really is. And I hope, and we kind of alluded to this at the beginning, I hope that the overload that we're experiencing right now has a slingshot effect.
Yeah.
Right.
We see these slingshot effects in history all the time, right? And it's one of the reasons we're dealing with these hyper weird cultural issues right now. Like, we know this. In the 80s and 90s, what did they do to women? They fat shamed us. Yeah. It was like you had to be 100 pounds. Yeah. Now we pretend obesity is beautiful.
Oh, wait, do I not have to be anymore?
No, you don't. But you see, they shamed. You remember when Jessica Simpson gained 10 pounds and she was on the front page of all and they're like, oh my gosh. So now we go in the other direction, and now it's okay to be clinically obese. It's not okay. It's not healthy, right? You know, we historically in this country, gay people were targeted. You know, gay people were not allowed to be their authentic selves and live how they want to live. But now, as retribution for that, now we have to pretend that, a 250-pound man is a woman. And so you see how that kind of works. Same with like the horrors of slavery, the original sin of this country. And we spent all these years trying to get to a place where it's like we would treat people not based on the color of their skin. But now, to make up for the horrors of the past, we actually have to treat people based on the color of the skin, but it has to be white people. And we've got to go the complete opposite direction. So I think you're going to see that with media as well. What I'm hoping is that there's some pullback where the younger generation is like, throws their phones in the trash and is like, I'm going to go touch grass today. I'm going to go play outside. And,
that is
so
happening.
I hope we see that. Or hell, you see this like trad effect, where these younger kids want to go back to traditional family values. And the women want to have children. And like, they want to be at home cooking and cleaning. Whereas like, when we were trying to come up, we're like, no, we want to be in the workforce and respected. It's the slingshot effect. And so I wish there was a time in history where we could come to a reasonable place. Is like, hey, we don't have to slingshot in the other direction. Right. We can come to a nice middle ground and just be normal and happy and healthy.
Well, one of the ideas that I was talking with one of our producers about is that the increase in trust in social media came about out of distrust of mainstream media.
Correct.
And so I think a lot of folks in America now say, I can't really trust mainstream media. You do have the same folks that are like, whatever Rachel Maddow says is gospel. But we also have a whole slew of folks that have transitioned away from mainstream media and again, get a lot of their information from social media. The algorithm is very, very difficult because you tend to get reinforced for the same perspective over and over and over again. But hopefully there'll be a point in time, I think to your point, where people, once they realize that social media is perhaps less credible than the mainstream media that they fled to begin with, that it does sort of spur this independent thought and desire to get information from disparate locations and disparate perspectives.
Yeah, I think like the popularity of these conversations, right, of the long format, you listening to Peter Attia, I do think there's this huge
and
appetite.
Andrew Huberman, we got to give Andrew a shout out.
Yeah, but the people are actually getting curious and trying to understand. And our kids are between 20 and 31, all of their partners. And it has been interesting. I feel almost more embraced by the younger generation right now, because there are a lot of kids on college campuses, who will say, thank God, I thought I was crazy. Yeah. What you're saying makes sense. Because again, I'm just trying to dwell in a more simple reality about, again, it's kind of predictable, like what you're talking about with your father, right? If you zoom in, it would have been fairly predictable, what could have happened when, and it didn't happen and so we just need to acknowledge that people are different, but thematically we're kind of the same. Yep. We all struggle in different ways at different times and need points of intervention, and we do need accountability. And so I really appreciate what you're doing. Anybody who is sincerely trying to understand and talk about issues, I'm so grateful for right now. So
thank you. Yeah, it's I have a bias, and I think one of the ways of building trust is just to acknowledge what your bias is. That's what people want right now, is they just want authenticity. So I'm not going to sit anymore and preach that like, hey, I'm, the word, the truth, and the gospel, and I'm directly in the middle. Yeah. And it's like, no, I have a bias. Here's what it is. Here's why I came to that position. And either you agree with me or you don't. In Seattle, a lot of people don't, but that's perfectly fine. But yeah, to your point and bringing it full circle to media, I'm not going to pretend that independent media is better than mainstream media. They're totally different. They're serving a specific purpose, but there is a lot of misinformation still out there, and there aren't specific standards for independent media. So it really is going to boil down to individuals deciding, hey, I want information, but I want to be able to take that information and think for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, there was an elected who said, basically, what is your strategy as far as communications? I was like, my strategy, I'm just trying to talk to community members and illuminate what's going on, because I feel like if we think it's going to be terrible like this forever, and it just is. I remember actually it was Dave Ross asked me. He did that thing that is always like, He was doing an interview. I thought it was going to be 3 minutes, and then he released the whole 40 minutes, like podcast style. And then I have to remember what I said. But one of the things he asked me, he said, is it reasonable to ever think of a Seattle without tens? And I said, 100%, Dave, of course. I said, we have to believe that is reasonable. Or otherwise we're never going to get there. But again, we've got to illuminate why it is the way it is.
And we have to want a Seattle without tents. We have to want it. Every leader has to want it. And I don't know that they do.
Yeah, I think that even when you joked about,
well, they say they do.
Airing the podcast, I think that there are other leaders I really respect. One of the things that we share is that we are willing every single day to be fired in pursuit of what is right for folks who are suffering. And I'm just trying to stay on really close to the suffering so that I don't get weak, or tepid, or think that it's not a job. I'm kind of in the season of life where it's a bit more of a mission. Plus, worst comes to worst, I'll just hang out on the boat with this guy and
there you go.
Argue over the dinner table. And
perfect. If you get fired, being here is not a bad place.
It's not a bad place to be fired.
Yeah.
But I will say again, in my boss's defense, I was recruited, and I have not been less supported because of the transparency. I haven't, just to your point, that the media wasn't trying to censor you. I haven't been. I haven't.
And who is your direct boss? Would it be the mayor?
So it's Natalie Walton Anderson now, who reports to the mayor. And before that, it was Deputy Mayor Burgess. But I think
And I like Tim. I think Tim's reasonable, rational.
Yeah. They've stayed pretty hands off with me. And I think that we just get more done if we at least, again, can anchor into the imperative of the work. And I agree with you. I think there are a lot of people who are escalating commitment to things that don't work because they made a campaign promise, or they said a thing, or they think that that's the public opinion. And I feel like, no, to inform the public opinion, right? Because people aren't dumb. And one of the most interesting questions I got asked recently, it was Brian Callanan. He was saying, Amy, Seattle Times just ran this article saying, violent crime is down. Mike Solon is saying, no, people aren't reporting. He was saying all of these different things. And he goes, what is your take? And I said, all of those things are true. And I think, again, that's what we're missing. That is all true. It's like, yeah, nationally violent crime is down. And 100% people aren't reporting crime in Seattle. I know that. They tell me.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose my insurance, or there's no point.
Right.
I'm not going to call 911 because I don't think you're going to send anyone. And so I don't know why it's so hard to just acknowledge that multiple things can be true.
So being honest would be important, having integrity.
Be honest. And you know what?
Yeah.
Being committed to, Bruce Harrell, and, I know that he's your boss's boss,
He's
so we
my
won't
boss.
get too.
Yeah.
I had high hopes for Bruce. I think Bruce loves Seattle. I think that he wanted the job for the right reasons. I think he's gotten caught in a trap that a lot of politicians get caught in, and that is prioritizing re-election over what they know needs to be done. I think he has it deep inside him. I think he's said and done some of the right things on public safety, but I think he's letting this small fringe voice in the community dictate what he knows to be good policy. And I would like to see him go back to the man who ran for office. I think it would be better for the city. And I do hope he wins, by the way. I don't know if you can say that. He's the only option. There is no other option but him at this point in the election. I just want him to be the person who I believe he is.
Yeah, I think all around the country we need elected officials who understand the issues better. And so again, it's like collectively we've got to be more candid and more transparent. It was interesting to go to the front line. So different permanent supportive housing environments, Harbor View. And I've tried to stress to other nonprofit leaders, just talk about it the way I am and say, no, we are trying to help, but we don't have this money, or we don't have this, or this policy precludes us from this. Like, just name it.
Yeah.
Don't say mission accomplished.
Yeah.
This model's working beautifully, because the public knows that it doesn't. And I think at this point, we don't believe diversion works. Yeah, it can work. It can work, but it works conditionally, right? Under certain circumstances. I think you referenced harm reduction. Like, the idea was always directional. It was. It's been kind of...
It's not a conclusion.
I mean, I actually, that was one of the things I said in a UW class that got a big response. It was a health policy, like a senior seminar. And somebody was asking me about something addiction related. And I said, listen, we need to remember that addiction, dependency on anything is not a desirable state. We shouldn't want that for people.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you're talking about gambling or porn or alcohol or whatever, it's something that we don't desire. And that is not the same thing as vilifying someone.
Yeah.
You know, so I think real compassion looks like, no, I still would want to help. And so I do feel pretty sympathetic to all parties involved. I think everybody's just got misinformation, and I think it depends on who's around you, who you actually trust, because there's no elected official that's going to be expert in law enforcement and in homelessness and in. So you need really responsible leaders to say, no, I know you think this is going to work, but actually.
Yeah, and they need to listen to the right people. I've never had someone on my show who's gotten out of addiction who told me that it was like a house that was the solution. It was always intervention. It was always, almost without fail, arrest.
Yeah.
Arrest or near death.
And you know what? Yeah. It's like I asked that question of everyone, because what I'm asking is, basically if I had a care team, right? If I had a diversion unit, and then we could have handed off Anne, I have asked more people, do you think in that circumstance, basically you might have come into recovery? Without being justice involved. No, I don't talk to them that way. No. And nobody said yes.
No, of course not.
And I want them to say yes, but nobody has. No. And what I hear is like, I was going to have to be arrested. Yeah. Like, that was just where my head was. Yeah. It had to be that severe. And, so again, I don't want that to be true.
Thank God I got arrested, or I'd be dead.
Or I'd be dead, yeah.
We do hear that all the time. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we tie up in a neat little bow.
Okay.
Why today's media may be better than, or the media options might be better, and must be part of that slingshot effect that you were talking about.
Well, I think it's because there are more options. Yeah. There's a reason why conservative media had to exist. It's because those voices, a whole swath of the American populace, and as much as people don't believe it, about 35% of the state of Washington was not being well represented by mainstream news. They weren't asking the questions that needed to be asked. They weren't asking questions through the lens of people who live in rural Washington state or in other parts of the country. So there's a bunch of people who weren't being represented. They're being represented now better by new media, one of the reasons I'm very firm that new media needs to have a seat at the table alongside old media, because we're there to represent a certain portion of the populace, and that wasn't being represented.
Right.
So to take us away or to keep us out, as
Yeah.
they tried to do with me in Olympia this year, you're basically silencing the voices of millions of people in the state. And so, yeah, I think it's better because it's an option. I'm not saying it's better because it's we never get anything wrong. I mean, we
Right.
don't have any whatever it is. We have better standards, but we need
Representation.
everyone to feel that they have a voice who's out there asking powerful people questions on their behalf.
Well, I wish the divide wasn't such a fork in the eye, because that really was, it's very rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's seldom do you see issues discussed substantively from different perspectives. And it was fantastic because of that.
It killed my spirit. No, I'm kidding. But all we did is I changed the name slightly. Now our show's called Undivided, just so Fox didn't sue us.
Right.
And,
I didn't know that. I never had the context or backstory. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
really
much for
fun.
having
I
me.
knew I'd
Okay,
love
good.
talking to you.
Yeah, I had a blast, and
And we will air this. I want you to know.
Well, no, I'm not so sure, but I'll be watching to make sure there's no slight edits.
Yeah, no, very much appreciate you coming on. You
Sure thing.
are a beast in the industry, and we love that you took the time to come and join us.
Yeah, and thank you for allowing us.
Well, I let the ladies talk a little
so
bit.
much,
Let
yes.
the ladies
No.
talk a little bit, and now you too know what it's like to have been bombarded.
I feel like I
It
have
wasn't
been
so
a little
bad.
bit too. Yeah.
It wasn't so. That's what they all say.
So bad.
The Bombarded Podcast is a Barden Squared production. Executive producers are Eric Barden and Amy Barden, and video and audio production of the Bombarded Podcast is by Thread Theory Creative.